November 12th, a date that has witnessed America at its most ambitious, its most divided, and its most vulnerable. It's a day when technological triumphs concealed fatal flaws, when political systems failed at their most basic task, and when warnings about global threats went unheeded. What if some of America's greatest mistakes weren't accidents, but the inevitable result of systems pushed beyond their limits? Today, we investigate 4 critical failures that happened on November 12th. Moments when ambition outpaced wisdom, and the consequences changed our world forever. We often think of history's turning points as battles or elections, but sometimes the most significant mistakes happen in engineering labs, in courtrooms, and in the quiet moments before a crisis. These are failures of systems we believed were foolproof. In this 20-minute investigation, we'll analyze 4 system failures that occurred on November 12th. We'll examine how the space program's compromises led to disaster, how America's voting system failed at a crucial moment, how intelligence agencies missed critical warnings, and how public health systems collapsed under pressure. These are not just stories of what went wrong. They're warnings about what happens when we stop questioning our own infallibility. Mistake number 1. Space Shuttle Program. The compromises before the disaster, 1977 to 2003. Our first investigation takes us to the final frontier, where American ambition and ingenuity were about to be tested in ways nobody anticipated. The context: the promise of routine space travel. In July of 1969, America had achieved the impossible. We had beaten the Soviets to the moon. But almost immediately, a daunting question emerged. What's next? Public interest was waning, and the political will to fund a series of ever more expensive Apollo missions was evaporating. NASA's budget was in freefall. The agency needed a new vision, one that was not just about flags and footprints, but about a permanent, economical American presence in space. The November 12th warning signs. The dream was bold and revolutionary, a fully reusable space truck. The initial concept was for a 2-stage system. A massive booster and a smaller orbiter, both with wings, both piloted, both would fly back to Earth and land on a runway like an airplane. After a quick turnaround, they'd be ready to fly again, perhaps within weeks. The goal was to make access to space routine and cost-effective. The promise to Congress was staggering. Up to 60 flights a year, with a cost as low as $20 million per launch in 1970s dollars. But this grand vision collided with a harsh political and budgetary reality. President Nixon was supportive of a new space project, but he was also presiding over a strained economy, the ongoing Vietnam War, and his expensive Great Society domestic programs. He gave NASA a clear directive. The new program's development cost had to be capped. There would be no blank check. This single constraint forced a series of catastrophic design compromises. The key design compromises: 1. The abandonment of full reusability. The first and biggest compromise was ditching the fully reusable design. Engineers realized the massive, complex booster stage was too expensive to develop. The solution: replace it with 2 cheap, solid rocket boosters, SRBs, that would parachute into the ocean to be fished out and refurbished. And instead of a complex, integrated fuel tank, they would use a simple, throwaway external tank, ET. This saved development money upfront but created recurring costs and immense physical danger with every single flight. 2. The military's demands and the winged bullet. To secure crucial political and budgetary support, NASA needed the U.S. Air Force as a partner. The Air Force agreed, but only if the shuttle could meet their needs, primarily launching large, secret spy satellites. This came with a devastating requirement. The shuttle had to have enough cross-range, the ability to glide sideways during re-entry, to land back in California after a single polar orbit. This once-around mission profile demanded large, straight wings. These wings made the orbiter inherently unstable during atmospheric flight, a flying brick that was incredibly difficult to land. More importantly, those large wings could not be folded away, creating a huge, fragile surface vulnerable to debris. 3. The pilot-like risk assessment. Selling the idea of a routine spaceship required selling the idea of safety. Early risk assessments, based more on hope than history, predicted a catastrophic failure rate of 1 in 100,000 flights. To put that in perspective, that's like claiming you could launch a shuttle every day for 274 years without a single accident. This culture of extreme optimism led to the most fatal compromise of all: the decision not to include a crew escape system. The thinking was that the vehicle was so safe, so reliable, that an escape system was an unnecessary expense and complexity. The crew was, effectively, locked in. 4. The relentless pursuit of weight savings. Every pound saved meant more payload could be carried. This relentless pressure led to thousands of small, dangerous decisions. The most famous? The external tank was painted white for its first 2 flights. Engineers soon realized this was unnecessary weight and stopped painting it, leaving the iconic rusty orange foam exposed. But that foam was fragile, and it was placed directly next to the most sensitive part of the orbiter, the heat shield tiles on the wings and nose, which were themselves a lightweight but incredibly brittle compromise. They could be damaged by a mere tool drop or, as we would tragically learn, a piece of flying foam insulation. The consequence? When compromise becomes catastrophe. So, the final design was a masterpiece of engineering, but a Frankenstein's monster of compromises. It was partially reusable, but expensive and dangerous to refurbish. It was built for the Air Force for missions it would rarely fly. It was declared as safe as an airliner, but had no escape system. The goal of routine, cost-effective space travel was a mirage, shattered by the political and budgetary realities of its birth. The stage was set for tragedy, born from decisions made not in a hangar, but in a budget meeting. Mistake number 2. Bush versus Gore. When democracy's systems failed, 2000. From the failures of physical engineering, we turn to the failure of democratic engineering, to a moment when the world's oldest constitutional democracy couldn't cleanly elect its president. The context: a perfect storm of political division. The 2000 presidential election between Republican George W. Bush and Democrat Al Gore was historically close. The entire outcome hinged on Florida's 25 electoral votes, where the initial vote count showed a margin of victory for Bush of fewer than 2,000 votes out of 6 million cast, triggering an automatic machine recount. This razor-thin margin exposed critical flaws in the state's election infrastructure, most notoriously the punch card ballot, which led to tens of thousands of disputed undervotes. Ballots where no clear choice was detected by machine, due to incompletely punched chads. The nation was plunged into a state of uncertainty, with both campaigns gearing up for a legal and political war over every single vote. The November 12th legal battle, the point of no return. By November 12, 2000, the crisis was in full swing. The automatic recount had narrowed Bush's lead to just a few hundred votes. On this day, the legal battlefield was set. The Gore campaign was focused on securing manual hand recounts in specific, heavily Democratic counties, arguing that human examiners could determine voter intent from the disputed ballots. The Bush campaign fought aggressively in court to stop all manual recounts, arguing that varying standards from county to county would be unfair and unconstitutional. This date marked the shift from a political dispute to a fundamental constitutional crisis. The question was no longer just about counting votes, but about who had the ultimate authority to set election standards, the Florida courts or the Florida legislature, which was controlled by Republicans. The consequence: a presidency decided by the court and a legacy of distrust. The legal battle culminated a month later in the U.S. Supreme Court's 5-4 ruling in Bush versus Gore, which halted the ongoing recount, effectively making George W. Bush the president. The consequences were profound. The court's legitimacy was politicized. The decision, which split along ideological lines, was viewed by many as a political act, severely damaging the Supreme Court's reputation as an impartial arbiter. Erosion of public trust. For a significant portion of the electorate, the outcome fostered a lasting belief that the election had been stolen or unfairly decided by the courts, rather than won by the voters. A blueprint for disputation. The event demonstrated that an election could be contested through the courts all the way to the highest level, setting a precedent for future legal challenges and deepening the era of hyper-partisan polarization over the very mechanics of democracy itself. Mistake number 3. Intelligence failure. The Paris attacks warnings, 2015. From a domestic crisis of democracy to a global failure of security, where the systems designed to protect us showed their fatal limitations. The context: a known and growing threat. In 2015, the terrorist organization ISIS was at the peak of its power, controlling vast territory in Iraq and Syria and explicitly calling for attacks in the West. Western intelligence agencies, including those of the US and France, were acutely aware of the threat. They knew ISIS had developed external operations cells for this purpose and were monitoring a high volume of suspicious chatter. However, the sheer scale of the threat, combined with the challenges of tracking individuals moving freely within Europe's Schengen area, which has open borders, created a needle in a haystack problem. The system was overwhelmed with leads, making it difficult to distinguish imminent, concrete plots from general threats. The November 12th aftermath. The unheeded warnings come to light. On the day after the coordinated attacks, November 12, 2015, the scale of the intelligence failure became starkly clear. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they discovered that multiple red flags had been missed. The attackers had been on the radar of various European intelligence services, but were often categorized as low-level threats or were lost in the system. Key individuals had traveled to and from Syria, yet this did not trigger a coordinated, high-priority response. The Belgian city of Molenbeek was identified as a crucial logistical hub for the plot, exposing a long-standing, unaddressed vulnerability in European counterterrorism efforts. The aftermath of November 12th was not just about mourning, but about a grim realization. The system had received signals but failed to connect them into an actionable picture. The consequences, the limits of global security. The consequences of this failure were immediate and long-lasting. A massive security crackdown. France declared a state of emergency and significantly ramped up its domestic security operations, a shift that later became enshrined in new, permanent anti-terrorism laws. Global policy shift. The attacks led to a major increase in intelligence sharing, however reluctantly, among Western allies and a more aggressive military campaign against ISIS targets in Syria and Iraq. The new normal of surveillance. The attacks were used to justify the expansion of mass surveillance programs by governments worldwide, arguing that preventing such complex attacks required sweeping powers to monitor digital and private communications, fundamentally shifting the balance between security and civil liberties. Mistake number 4. Pandemic preparedness. The system that wasn't ready, 2020. Our final investigation brings us to the most recent and personally familiar failure. When a threat we knew was coming found us completely unprepared. The context. Warnings ignored and systems dismantled. For decades, experts had warned that a global pandemic was not a matter of if, but when. Simulations like the 2019 Event 201 tabletop exercise had explicitly modeled a coronavirus pandemic, revealing glaring vulnerabilities in the global response. Despite these warnings, the systems designed to handle such a threat had been eroding. In the US, funding for public health infrastructure was inconsistent, the national stockpile of critical medical supplies was undermaintained, and international early warning networks were underfunded. The prevailing assumption was that modern medicine and technology could rapidly contain any outbreak, leading to a dangerous complacency and a systematic lack of investment in core public health capabilities. The November 12th surge, the unfolding system collapse. By November 12, 2020, the theoretical failure had become a catastrophic reality. The United States was experiencing a massive, uncontrolled surge in COVID-19 cases, hurtling toward what would be its deadliest wave. This date serves as a snapshot of systemic collapse. Healthcare systems, hospitals across the Midwest and Great Plains were at or over capacity, facing critical shortages of ICU beds, staff, and essential supplies like ventilators and personal protective equipment, PPE. Testing and tracing. The testing system was overwhelmed, with slow turnaround times rendering contact tracing, a cornerstone of outbreak control, largely ineffective. Political and public confusion. A fragmented national strategy and mixed public health messaging had led to pandemic fatigue and widespread public noncompliance with safety measures, fueling the virus's spread. This surge demonstrated that after nearly a year of warning, the core systems of response were still failing. The consequences, the cost of unpreparedness. The failure of pandemic preparedness had profound and lasting consequences. Staggering loss of life. The U.S. experienced one of the highest per capita death tolls among wealthy nations, with the November 2020 surge directly contributing to hundreds of thousands of deaths. Economic shock. The crisis triggered massive job losses, business closures, and unprecedented government stimulus spending, leading to long-term inflation and economic instability. Eroded trust. The chaotic response severely damaged public trust in governmental institutions, scientific authorities, and the media, deepening political and social divisions. It exposed a lack of national resilience and served as a brutal lesson on the cost of neglecting public health infrastructure. Conclusion. The pattern of systemic failure. When we look at these 4 events together, space exploration, democratic elections, global security, and public health, a disturbing pattern emerges. In each case, we had ample warning. We had experts sounding alarms. We had systems that were supposed to prevent exactly these kinds of failures. The common thread isn't a lack of knowledge or capability. It's a failure of what we might call system humility. The willingness to acknowledge that our complex systems can and will fail, and to build robust safeguards accordingly. We become so enamored with our own technological and institutional sophistication that we stop preparing for failure. November 12th teaches us that the most dangerous mistakes aren't the ones we make in moments of crisis, but the ones we build into our systems during times of calm. The test of any system isn't whether it works when everything goes right, but whether it fails safely when things go wrong. Which of these system failures do you think was most preventable? What current systems should we be questioning today? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe in learning from these structural failures, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, the systems we trust today are only as strong as our willingness to question them tomorrow.